welcome to all of you. If you just joined us today, we're only in the second part of a series as we talk about God's game plan for our life. We started talking last week about finding really the answer to a question all of us have or have asked at some point in our life. We all want to know what the will of God is for our life. So we kind of landed on that whole thing last Sunday. What's God's will for my life? And if you're watching at home, watching online, you can check last week's sermon online as well. We're glad that you're with us today. And we started exploring this common question. What's God's will for my life? What's God's game plan for my life? And we started out talking about some teaching on this whole thing, that God's got this providential will. It's got a moral will. We don't really know much about the providential will or the moral will. We really don't care. We just want to know the personal will. What does God want for my life? Should I buy the blue one or the red one? Do I marry her or do I marry her? Like, do I go to this college or do I stay home and live with my parents? I mean, those are the questions we ask, right? We want to know God's personal will for our life. The providential will is the stuff that God's going to do because God is God. It's just God, and He's got the remote control. He's large and in charge. And then the moral will of God is like, how am I supposed to live my life? Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't commit adultery, all those kinds of things. Pay your taxes, obey the governments, and all those. We don't pray much about God's moral will because we kind of know what our will is. We just kind of gloss over that. We want to know the personal will of God. What's God's personal will for my life? And I kind of thought about this from my own life, and I maybe you can relate to where I'm at on this whole thing. I think that we kind of get caught up really in one common emotion to all of us from really understanding and realizing God's will for our life. I think a lot of us have a sense of what God wants from us and for us. What we learned last week is the first and foremost will of God is that everybody comes to a faith relationship with Him, repents of sin, and turns to Him so that we're not eternally destroyed. That's the will of God. That's the love of God. We learned that last week. But when it comes to living our lives in the personal will of God, we have this common emotion that all of us feel and all of us face about stepping ahead and moving ahead and taking some risks with God. And I think I know what it is. But first, before we even talk about that, how many remember these days? Put that slide up here, Deb. How many remember these days? Remember that? How many ever remember pretending that you were somebody else? You were a superhero. Anybody remember that? When you were a little kid, you were Mighty Mouse, you were Batman, you were Superman or Wonder Woman or whatever you wanted to be. My family still makes fun of me because I would tie one of Grandma's towels around my neck and jump around the furniture at the farm where my grandma lived singing That Man, That Man, That Man. I couldn't hear. It's a bad TV set, right? That Man. I thought it was That Man. And so anyway, we've all pretended that we were somebody else. We wanted to live somebody else's dream. You know, you ever watch the Olympics? You get inspired as you watch the Olympics, and you're watching the Olympians on there, and you go, yeah, I could do that, you know, and you're just all bowed up, and the next day you're out buying exercise equipment and a bicycle and whatever the kind of thing is. Or how many remember this? Listening to your favorite rock band. You know, I remember this in high school. Just bear with me. High school. Got my big old Koss headphones on that looked like Princess Leia. They were huge, you know. Laying in bed, listening to Boston. We were just another band out of Boston. The whole thing. And I'm imagining myself on the stage. Come on, guys. You did the same thing. Everybody's going, screaming. All the women in the crowd are reaching for me. Y'all remember that, right? Remember that? There's just one woman that reaches for me now in the crowd, right? Okay, so anyway, you remember that and you wish that you were somebody else. And I think for a lot of us, instead of fulfilling the dreams that God has for our lives, we're so busy worried about the dreams that God is fulfilling in the lives of other people. They get an award, they come to church, we come to church, and they're getting special attention up here, or it's the company banquet, and the boss is giving them a big plaque, and we wish that was us getting that. And I think we spend so much time focusing and concentrating on other people's accomplishments and God's dream for their lives and God's individual will for their lives. We miss God's will for our life because of one very common emotion that all of us possess in this place. Fear. There's a sense of fear. I know God has something for me. There's this thing inside of me that would like to try, I would like to do, I wish I could become, I wish I could go, whatever it might be, but I'm afraid. I remember leading the youth group in this church many years ago, feeling the tug of God in my heart, and it's like, I know God has some sort of a call in my life, and I should maybe go into the ministry, but man, to go in the ministry, that is you got to stand in front of people, and you don't get paid nothing for being a pastor. I mean, to go into ministry, you got to be kidding me. I'm not going to be a pastor. I'll never be a rock star leading Boston with women reaching out to me like if I become a pastor. I remember just all of that whole kind of thing going on. And then in the summer of '89, we had an intern here working with the youth group, and I was working with the youth then as well. And he said, "You ever thought about pursuing God's call in your life? I see a call of God on your life." And I said, "Well, yeah, actually, I have, but," and you can come up with all kinds of reasons why you shouldn't obey the will of God, right? And see, all of you have a gift. You have a gift specific to you. And you know that you do because at some point in your life, somebody's put an arm around you, they've spoken with you, they've talked to you and said, "You are so good at that. You are really gifted. You can do something. I've never seen anybody do it like you do. There is something about you that is just different." Oh, well, we don't know what to do with that, do we? But inside of us, there's this yearning to go beyond where we are. But if we do, we're going to have to take a risk. And we don't want to take a risk because we are afraid, aren't we? Well, if you've ever felt that emotion, you're certainly not the first. I'm going to start in one passage of Scripture in 2 Timothy this morning, and then I'm going to jump to another one in Matthew. If you want to follow along, I'm going to go this morning, first of all, to 2 Timothy chapter 1, and record, just share, just kind of an emotion, just kind of where all of us are, get us on the same page. A guy named Paul writes this letter to a young man named Timothy. Timothy is a preacher. He's preaching in this church that Paul started, and Paul writes these letters to encourage him, to instruct him, and to kind of give him some guidance in how he should lead this church. And I think as we read through this, we're going to find that this emotion that Paul addresses is so common to all of us. Look what he says in 2 Timothy 1, beginning of verse number 6. He says, "I remind you," speaking to Timothy, "to fan into flames." He uses terminology that we even understand today. We've all been around a bonfire. We've been at a fireplace where the fire has gone out. The fire has gone out, but there's burning coals within. And if you're a pyromaniac, like most guys are, you love to poke in there a little bit, you love to get the bellows or a tube or something, and you start to blow into those, and all of a sudden the fire begins to burn bright again, and that whole thing. Paul uses that same imagery when he says, "Fan into flames the spiritual gift that God gave you when I laid my hands on you." Apparently for Timothy, at some point in time, maybe he'd kind of pulled back a little bit. I mean, Timothy's this young preacher in this mature church. And there's an element of this emotion, I think, fear inside of him. And I think that's true because of what Paul says in the next verse. For, here's why I want you to fan that flame. Here's why I want you to reignite this passionate, burning desire within you, Timothy, because I know what you can feel, because it's the same thing all of us can feel. Because God's not given us a spirit of, say it with me, fear and timidity, but one of power and love and self-discipline. It's like Paul knew us. He said, look, you can maybe start something, but you pull back. You start to question yourself. You want to take a risk. You want to start moving towards what you think is God's will in your life, but you pull back because of this thing called fear. And anytime you take risk, there's an element of fear, but to risk nothing is to risk everything. To risk nothing is to risk everything. And we're going to read a story that illustrates that. So if you want to follow along, get your Bibles, your devices, we're going to go to Matthew chapter 25 and read what might be a very familiar parable to you that Jesus told. Now, before I get there, let me give you some background to this parable. Jesus, in chapters 23, 24, and 25 of Matthew, is talking about end-time events and getting prepared for end-time events. And in Matthew chapter 25, it's no different. He's talking about preparing for his return, but framed within the context of his return, he tells a parable that has an incredible principle for all of us today that we can apply. And so Jesus tells this story beginning in Matthew 25, verse number 14. And the story is amazing as he tells the story. Jesus, the master communicator. He tells a story that gets everybody, all his listeners of the time, really on the same page, and he creates tension within the story. And I'll try to explain the tension, and then he gives relief to the tension at the end. It's an amazing thing. So he starts in verse number 14. It says, "The kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip." Now, Jesus is going to tell a story that was really it was understandable to the original hearers of the time. He says, look, this guy's going to go on a long trip. It's a bureaucratic society. We've got very wealthy people and very poor people. And the very wealthy people had people working for them. And it was common to go on a long trip, and you would just entrust your business, you'd entrust your belongings, you just entrust it to somebody that worked for you until you come back. So he's going on this long trip, and he called together his servants, and he entrusted money to them while he was gone. Now this is where the story gets good. This is where the story gets good. Verse 15, he gave 5 bags of silver to one. That's the way I read it in my Bible. Your version might say he gave 5 talents of gold. We'll talk about talents in a little bit. But he gives 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last. And then he explains why he did this. He divided it in proportion to their ability, and then he left them and went on his trip. Now, it's not like Jesus is devaluing one person over another. It's not like saying, well, they're better than you, so they're getting more to be entrusted with, and you're kind of a loser, so you just get 1 bag. Look, Jesus in the story is telling it just like any employer would, that depending on where you live and what you do, you have different opportunities. I know that in Williston, North Dakota, we have different opportunities for reaching people and doing all kinds of God work through Life Church than we would in Grenora, North Dakota, right? We have different opportunities in Los Angeles, California, than we have in Williston, North Dakota. And all the ladies say, when it comes to shopping, there's more opportunity in Minot than there is in Williston, North Dakota. Jesus just divides the wealth according to the opportunities laid up before them. And then the master that divided out the money, the 5 bags, 2 bags, 1 bag, he goes on his trip. Now, maybe your Bible uses the word talent, and it's not talent like, they can sing better. It's not America's Got Talent kind of talent. Talent was a unit of measurement. It was for weighing things. A talent was about 75 pounds. And if your Bible says 75 pounds of gold or a talent of gold, that's equal, I did the math, about $1.44 million in today's currency. So imagine you get 5 bags, one guy gets 2, you get just 1. I mean, wouldn't it be great to have 1 bag of gold today? Anybody with me on that whole thing? And just see what we do with that. So they all get their money, and he goes off. Well, verse 16, the story plays out, and it really doesn't elaborate much on what they do here. Verse 16, it says, the servant who received the 5 bags of silver, he began to invest the money, and he earned 5 more. And all the employers in here went, hire that boy, right? The next verse goes on to say in 17, the servant with 2 bags of silver, he also went and he worked and he earned 2 more. Now, Jesus, when he tells the story, doesn't really elaborate much about how they invested the money or what they did, because he's not talking about the amount of money in the story. The amount of money isn't the object. The object of the story is the amount of risk. And the twist in the story is about to come. I mean, this is great. You can just hear as this story is being told. If you were watching this as a movie, the music is upbeat, it's uplifting, and boy, the whole orchestra is just hitting, and there's power as these guys go to work and they start investing the money. And you can just see the images changes as these guys are investing the money, and all of these things are taking place. And Jesus tells the story, and that's exactly the way the movie plays out. But then we get to the 3rd servant, and the music changes. The music darkens. There's a tone of despair and concern in the story, because this is where the twist in the story comes. Because of that 3-letter word that we start verse 18 with. But. Verse 18 says, the servant who received the 1 bag of silver, he went to the tool shed, got out his spade, went out to the backyard. And he dug a hole in the ground, and he hid his master's money. Can you about imagine what that day was like? He knows that one day his master is going to come back. We have to explain what we're doing, but I think I know why he did this. I mean, out in the backyard, and he shovels the dirt, and he fills the hole, and he pats it back down, and stomps it a little bit with the foot, and smooths it over, and puts a plug of grass back in there, and just walks away from it. And I think I know why he did that. We're going to see a little bit later in the story, but I think the story reveals why he did that. Okay. The first 2 guys that worked for the boss, They took some risks. It made them be busier than they'd ever been before. They were doing more than they had ever done before. There was not a lot of time to relax in front of the TV set because we're investing the master's money. We've got work to do. We've got stuff to do. And then this guy said, you know what? If I do anything with my one bag of silver, well, I've got a routine. I mean, 60 Minutes is on tonight. And football is on tonight. And I can't possibly do anything with this money tonight. And then tomorrow, tomorrow, well, there's tomorrow. You just never know what tomorrow might bring. And so let's just play it safe. And I'll just bury them. We'll just play it safe. I've got a routine. I've got a plan. And you know what? If I do anything with the master's money, it just interrupts my life. And I don't want my routine and my life interrupted. So we'll just keep it in the ground. And then as the listeners to this story were listening to Jesus tell it, they know where this is going to go. They can feel the tension because they know the master is going to come back. Sure enough, Jesus gets to that point in the story. In verse 19, he says, after a long time, their master returned from his trip, and he called for an account of things. You can about imagine this. He gets back to town, we unpack some things, we get some things put away, and we're going to be back in the office on Thursday morning, and Wednesday afternoon, the three servants are getting text messages, meet me tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in the boardroom. And well, the first two were probably not too bothered by the whole thing. There's an unknown about what the meeting is going to be like, but the third guy who gets the text message and knows the meeting is about to come, it's uncomfortable. Verse number 20, the story plays out. The servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver, he came forward at the boardroom table with 5 more bags. And he said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I got you 5 more. Wouldn't you love to be the guy that was able to say that? The point of the story isn't the amount of money. It's about the amount of risk. It's about the amount of obedience of these guys in the story. It's not about the amount of money. It's the amount of risk. Look how the master responds in 21. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. I mean, good job. You've been faithful in handling a small amount, so now I'm going to give you even more responsibility. And then I love the last line of this. Let's call Jimmy John's. Let's celebrate, right? It was an exciting thing. Let's turn on smoke and mirrors and have disco music going and have a party. You did a good job. Let's celebrate. You know what's on the other side of risk? Celebration. You know what's on the other side of risk? Reward. It was an amazing day. Well, if that wasn't enough, they just hung up the phone with Jimmy John's, and the second guy starts to talk. The servant who had received 2 bags of silver, he came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest in, and I've got 2 more. Hang on. He's on the phone. Just hang on a second. Hang on. There's going to be more sandwiches. And he says in verse 23, the master said, well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling a small amount, so now I'm going to give you more responsibility. And then look at it. Let's celebrate together. Don't you love this? Let's go to work there, right? This must be like Google or Zappos. I don't know. All they do is party all day long. It's just a great place to work. It's all a fun atmosphere. You can about imagine these guys plopping their bags of silver up on the boardroom table, and it's they're singing Casey and the Sunshine Band. Let's celebrate, or whatever. I don't know the song anymore. You sing it. I don't want to sing it. And they're just having a great time, And can't you just feel the tension in the story? Because this is like a movie that you've seen before, not once, not twice. I mean, you just know how it's going to, and it turns out the same every time. And you wish it would change. You just wish it would change. We've all watched the movie, and in your mind, you know how it's going to turn out, but you will it to be different, but it never is. And that's exactly the case in this story, because got kind of quiet in the boardroom. Verse 24 says, the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you to be a harsh man, harvesting crops where you didn't plant. Now look, the other 2 guys didn't have a speech. They just said, look, you gave me 5, I got you 5 more. You gave me 2, I gave you 2 more. This guy starts with a story. I mean, this guy already knows that he's in trouble. But before you fire me, let me just tell you what happened. Do you know anybody like, well, the reason, here's what happened, and they all have a story, don't they? There's a story. Well, the reason I'm late for work today, well, I lost my dipstick, and the reason I lost my dipstick is because, well, my dog ate my homework. I mean, the story just goes on and on and on and on and on, and we've got some sort of convoluted story as to why we're late, or didn't show up, or didn't have enough, and couldn't pay we've all got a story. And this guy starts out with his story. And he says, look, I know that you're a harsh man, harvesting where you didn't plant crops and gathering crops where you didn't cultivate. And I think this was not true of the master. You know what I think the guy is doing? He's trying to turn responsibility off of himself and put it on the master. He already knows what's going to happen. He already knows what he's done with the money. The master doesn't know what he's done with the money, but he himself knows. And he's in essence saying, you know what? Before I plop my one lousy bag of silver back on the table, the same bag of silver, let me tell you, the reason that I didn't take any risks is because you're a horrible boss. I heard somebody who did a seminar in this church some time ago say this. He said, you know what? Every excuse is just a reason wrapped in the skin of a lie. I thought that was pretty good. Now, parents, you're going to run with that one, aren't you? Why isn't your bed made? Well, just remember what pastor said. I don't remember what he said, but just remember it, So we're just going to go there. But the real reason is really revealed in the story. The real reason why he did nothing, the real reason why he never took any risk is really revealed in verse number 25. I was afraid. I didn't want to take any risks. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know the outcome of it, so I was unwilling to do anything with it. So I was afraid that I was going to lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here it is. Boom, plops it back up there and brushes some of the dirt off the bag. I wonder what it was like for the other two servants that day. Want to get away? Well, the master in verse 26 says, you wicked and lazy servant. Fascinating statement Jesus makes here in the story that he's telling. You wicked and lazy servant, if you knew that I harvested crops and that I didn't plant and gathered, or I didn't cultivate, why didn't you at least deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest from it. Fascinating thing. There's nothing in this story about the servant being morally wicked. Nothing about him not paying taxes. There's nothing in there about him not being faithful to his wife. There's nothing in there about being disobedient to government authorities. So it wasn't that he was morally wicked. The rebuke from Jesus came from this. It seems in the story Jesus is saying, you know who got in trouble? The guy who didn't take any risks. I laid out so many resources for you. I gave you a bag of silver. You didn't need 5 bags. You didn't need 2 bags. I know where you live. I know what you're capable of doing. I know your character. I know your nature. I know you better sometimes than you know yourself. And so I gave you that bag of silver to go do something with it, and you did nothing with it. It's not that you were morally wrong. You just didn't take any risks. You didn't take the step of faith. You didn't move towards obedience. You just buried it in the backyard so that you could continue with your life as comfortable as you possibly could. In essence, I think the story is saying if you risk nothing, you risk everything. Just like the servant did, and you'll see how it turned out for him. Well, verse number 28 says, the master in the story, he ordered this. He says, look, take the money from this servant and give it to the one with the 10 bags of silver. This guy knows opportunity and he knows how to take advantage of opportunity. And it's not about fairness. It's just about the reality of life. And then Jesus has a conclusion to the whole principle that he's laying out here. So he told the whole story. And Jesus almost always gave a conclusive statement to the parables that he told. And he does the same in this one. Verse number 29. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given them. And they'll have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even with what little they have, it'll be taken away. Let me paraphrase it for you like this. These words right here of Jesus, in essence, say, use it or lose it. It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. If we are obedient with the little challenges that God lays out for us. Oh, my goodness. As I was here as a youth pastor and the youth group began to grow, this is a long, long time ago. This is back in the 80s when we had big hair, you know. And in the 90s, it was just an incredible thing. And the youth group came together. And then God removed us from this church and took us to this little bitty town of Glen Ellen to be the lead pastor, the senior pastor of this church in this little town. Population 927 when we moved there, and it swelled all the way to 800 by the time we left. And we got there, and I remember coming into that church, that little church, and the youth that I pastored more youth than I pastored in the church, but I felt the weight of being the lead pastor in that church. Oh God, how am I going to remember the names of all these people? I remember praying that prayer. Oh God, how can I possibly lead this church? There was fear in my heart leading that little church because of the weight and the responsibility of being the lead pastor was on my shoulders. You know, when you're a staff pastor, you're not afraid of anything because you can always blame the lead pastor for whatever goes wrong. So you don't care, right? He's the umbrella. It's no big deal. So you can just blame him. But now you're the lead pastor. The buck stops right here with Mr. Wallstead, right? And I started to pastor this church, and it was a scary thing, but God graciously helped us through the years. And then Williston called. And when the idea of coming to Williston was proposed to us, my first response was so spiritual and godly. Without even praying, I said, no. I don't want to go to Williston. And then we came up here after some lengthy time of prayer. Came in with a board. It was a Saturday morning in March of 2010. I sat up here. I remember looking across, going, oh, look at all the chairs in this place. I can't do this. I mean, you could put almost three of my Glen Ellen churches inside of this sanctuary alone, you know. And here we are. And when we came, we left a building project in Glen Ellen, North Dakota. I mean, we were going to build down there. We had to raise, hang on to your chairs, we had to raise about $300,000 to build that church. I know. And here we are looking at a $7 million project. To build a building was not on the horizons for this guy when I came to Williston, North Dakota. And yet, let me just tell you, saying yes to God to go into the ministry in the first place. Scary? Oh, yeah. Coming back here to pastor a youth group in Williston? Scary? Yeah. Going to Glen Ellen to pastor a little church here? Scary. Coming back here? No, it was terrifying, not scary. I mean, but I'm telling you, on the other side of obedience and taking risks, guess what we have experienced all along the way? Reward. It's been reward. It's been exciting. I would never have the opportunity to stand before you and share my heart and share the Word of God and pastor you and pastor a community and be a part of anything that we did here and have so much fun as we're having right now if I'd never taken those risks. I'm telling you, you start taking the risks and you feel the rewards on the other side. Come on, let's celebrate together, Jesus would say. You take that risk. Now look, the risk looks different in all of our lives, doesn't it? It looks different for all of our lives. Because some of you, it's a risk about relationship or marriage or job or career, or leading your home in a spiritual way, whatever the case might be. The risk looks different for all of us. But I'm telling you that when you take the risk according to what Jesus said in the story, there's a reward. Well, what do we do with this? What do we do with this? How do we respond? Finding the will of God. You say, Pastor, look, great story. I'm here to find the personal will of God. I'm still praying about, do I buy the blue one or the red one? So what am I supposed to do? I'm still wondering what career God has me. Am I supposed to go to this college or not go to this college? Which college do I pick? So what do I do? I just thought from the story, I'd put a few thoughts for you, and I'll put them on the screen for you. The first one is this. Understand this. God has given you a gift specific to you. It's nobody else's gift. I could put on Superman's cape. I am not going to do what Superman does. God has made a cape that is specific to me. It's just mine. It's my spiritual gift. I cannot try to live your life vicariously through you. It's just, this is what God has done for me. And God has done the same thing for you, whether it's singing, cooking, sewing, loving, hugging, encouraging, working hard with your hands, I don't know what it is, but God has gifted you, and you know it because somebody's told you. But I don't know where you come from, but in North Dakota, we're so good at this humility thing. You are so good. I've never seen anybody so good. Oh, no, I'm not good. There's somebody way better than me. Man, own it. Yes, I am. Am I not? I'm good. You know, I am so good. Shaking hands after the first service, one lady complimented me, and I said, you are wonderful. She said, yes, I am. I love it, see? God has given you a gift. Own it. Just own it. The second thing you need to do, is look, just identify your fear. You need to say, yeah, I am honestly very afraid of that. I remember the conversation I had with my wife at Bonanza, family restaurant, contemplating obeying the call of God. I could take you right to where I was standing. Where I remember it, and I'm the one up here, so I get to tell the story, right? I fear the day I'll never give my wife the microphone because you'll hear the real stories then. And I remember standing in Bonanza, talking to my wife about just feeling this call, and we stood there and cried. Because it was scary. It's scary. Let's just be honest. There's some things God has spurned in your heart, and He wants you to be obedient. And you know that if you take that step of faith, if you move towards that step of risk, it's scary. Just be honest with yourself. The third thing you need to do, take the risk, find the reward. Take the risk, find the reward. Because that's what Jesus said happened in the story. These guys took the risks. And they're benefiting the reward. You know this, don't you? If you are a saver, you're making financial investments, you're buying into things, you're putting things away, and you get that statement, and over a period of time, you begin to see the reward for the risks that you have taken. Dad, let me just tell you something. You are so afraid to lead your home spiritually. You are so terrified because what if I pray wrong? I don't know how to pray. And what if the kids don't sit still? And what if there's all these what ifs? And I want to be the spiritual leader. And you know that your family wants you to be the spiritual leader. But you just fear taking that risk. I'm telling you what. You start taking the risk and being the spiritual leader of the home. Your wife will think you are the best looking thing. I'll just tell you what. She's just going to go, my husband, just makes me love him so much. He is a man. Tell you? You'll find the reward. You'll be walking around popping buttons with all the pride you got in your heart. Okay? I'm just telling you, take the risk. What does the risk look like for you? And sometimes, and here's another little principle that Robin and I found out when we said yes to God going into the ministry. Right now, there's no peace in your heart, is there? There's no peace. There's just turmoil because you don't know. Should I, shouldn't I? This one, that one. Yes or no? Now, later. It's a quandary for you. I'm just telling you. God might be just waiting for you to make a decision because the peace you are looking for doesn't come until you take the step of faith. It just doesn't happen. That same friend of mine that was here in 1989. I mean, what did he know? He was younger than I was, and he was just this little pip from a college and coming telling me that he saw a call of God in my life and I should be obedient. And I'm trying to rationalize with him. Yeah, well, and I don't know, and whatever. And he says, well, here's one thing I do know. God can't steer a parked car. You better make a decision. Well, the spirit of slap came over me. I wanted to hit him because he was right. That's exactly where you are today. God might be just waiting for you to make some decision. And the last thing I want you to remember before we end today is this. To risk nothing is to risk everything. To risk nothing is to risk everything. And I didn't make that up. Jesus told it in the story. You can read the rest of the parable. I didn't read the entire parable. I didn't read the outcome of that last servant to you. But to risk nothing is to risk everything. For some of you, you know what? This is a risk decision for you. You need to be a follower of Jesus Christ. That's a risk decision for you. That's a huge thing for you to do, because you know just enough about Christianity to know that if you make a decision to be a follower of Christ, some things in your life are going to change. And people are going to say things about the changes you're making in your life. And you're just not sure you're ready for that yet. I get that. Until you're ready, don't you dare make a decision for Jesus, because you'll just slip right back into old ways again. But when you're ready to make the risk and say, you know what, Jesus, I'm ready to follow you right now, then you make that decision, and you make it once and you make it forever in your whole life. For some of you, just trying to make the decisions, the choices in your life, and fear is the thing holding you back. Contemplating, proposing to Robin. We're dating, and I'm just not sure if I should ask this girl out. I got my answer from God, believe it or not, in a pet store. The pet store owner, they attended this church. And I remember telling her, I just don't know what to do. I feel like I want to get married to her, but I am afraid I will never be able to afford. I'm afraid, because I know it's going to cost money, and I'm just trying to be responsible here. And I want to make sure that I have enough money saved up before I marry her. I just want to have all my ducks in a row. And she just said, if you wait that long, you'll never get married. I realized there was a big decision to make. There was fear holding me back. The day we got married, I felt bad for you. I feel bad for you now. I didn't feel bad for you then. I was only thinking of me. But I'm with my groomsmen and best man, and we're back in a room in the church. My uncle, who's a phenomenal pianist, starts playing worship choruses back there in the room after we got our tuxedos on. Man, we started singing, and the Spirit of God just hit like a ton of bricks. And we were just worshiping God. We were all just tears running down our faces. And in that moment and in that time, I am realizing what it is I'm about to do. I'm about to walk down an aisle. I'm about to take a vow to this woman and before God and get married. And I can't undo that. I'm dying to myself. I'm dying to myself. In that moment, I am dying to myself. This is all the stuff going on in my head, my 25-year young head on my wedding day. It's time for us to go get married. And I walk out in the hallway from the classrooms, and man, I'm just snot-nosed and red-faced. And Robin, are you okay? I think Robin was afraid I'd changed my mind. I was messed up because I knew it was the right thing to do. But I was still scared.